Right, wonderful. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. It being 1 o'clock almost on January 4th, we'll call to order the January 4th meeting of the Architectural Review Board of Albemarle County. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with ordinance number 20-A16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID disaster. Quorum is present. Members of the review board here electronically are myself, Dave Vanderwerf, Frank Stoner, Fred Missel, Frank Hancock, and Chris Henningsen. There are opportunities for public access to this meeting, which are posted on the county's website at the county calendar. The public has real-time audio visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over phone. Both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This online meeting and any associated chats are a public record and are subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. We have a number of applicants and attendees today. Carolyn Schaefer, our recording secretary, may need to contact you during this meeting, so please check the chat box during the meeting and respond as necessary if she reaches out to you. For all speakers, when it's your turn to speak, please state your name for the record, and for everyone participating today, please keep your microphone muted except when you're speaking. For applicants making presentations, we're limiting those to 15 minutes, which you can divide equally or as you choose among your staff, among your members. And Carolyn will let us know when 15 minutes is up. So this as our first meeting of the year. It's our annual meeting and includes elections, adoption of the rules of procedure, and adoption of the meeting schedule. So to begin, we'll go to elections, and I'll begin by asking for any nominations for chair.
I would like to nominate Dave Vanderwerf for chair.
I'll second.
Great. If are there any other nominations? So I guess we'll ask for a motion to close the nominations then.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And Carolyn, could you record?
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Abstain.
Mr. Missel.
Aye.
Great, thank you. We'll turn now to nominations for vice chair. I'd be happy to nominate Fred, if I may.
I'll second.
Are there any other nominations? Can we have a motion to close the nominations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Great. Carolyn, could you call the vote?
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
and Mr. Missel.
Abstain.
Great, thank you all. So moving to the rules of procedure. Margaret, can you share your presentation?
Sure. The rules of procedure were included in your packets. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at them. There were only a couple of changes or items noted. One change would be obviously to update the year, which I got wrong. It's not 2020, it's 2021. So we will make that change. On page 3 under 3D, I discovered that there is a discrepancy in what's listed as time limits for applicants and other speakers. The rules of procedure say 10 minutes. Our policy has been 15 minutes. So really, this is the only I have for you. Do you want to keep it at the 15 minutes that we've been doing, or do you want to switch back to 10 minutes that was in a previous version of the rules?
15 generally seems to be necessary for most applicants. So it's useful. I don't know if others would disagree.
I agree.
It looks like everyone's in agreement. And then I guess the only other question is, did anyone have anything else that they felt needed to be changed in the rules? Seeing.
Aye.
Okay, then a motion to approve the rules of procedure for 2021 with the one change noted, changing from 10 minutes to 15 minutes for speaking limit for applicants.
So moved.
Second. Carolyn, can you call the vote?
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
and Mr. Missile.
Aye.
And I'm sorry, I missed who seconded that motion.
Mr.
I did.
Vanderwerf.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. We'll turn now to the 2021 submittal and meeting schedule.
The schedule that we're asking you to adopt today is, as we discussed previously, it's maintaining the same schedule as we've done for the past many years. ARB meeting days would be the first and third Monday of the month, beginning at 1 p.m. With the Monday meeting moving to a Tuesday if the Monday's a holiday. And so we're looking for a motion to approve the 2021 submission and review schedule as it was presented.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye, aye.
Mr. Missile.
Aye.
Thank you.
I think you missed me in there, Carolyn.
Carolyn, could you record Frank Stoner's vote?
Yes, I did.
Great. We'll turn now to disclosures. Do any ARB members have anything to disclose?
Yes, I do.
No.
Actually, two items on the agenda are being presented by the firm that I'm a principal of. So I'll be abstaining from those votes and probably just sitting out of the discussion just so it doesn't seem like I'm swaying it in one way or another. So that would be Scott's Ivy Exxon and Sleep Number.
Thank you, Chris. To public comment now. Carolyn, are there any members of the public wishing to address any items not on the agenda?
No, sir, no one has their hand raised at this time.
Thank you. We have nothing on the consent agenda or for work session, so we'll turn to regular review items. There are two items scheduled for today. The first is ARB 2020-125 Scott's Ivy Exxon. Chris, can you give us your presentation?
Me unmute. Are you all viewing the correct screen?
Yes, yeah, we can see your presentation, Chris.
All right. The application I'm presenting on is a review of architectural and initial site plan to construct a 3,200 square foot addition to an existing service station and to complete associated site improvements. The site is located at 4260 Ivy Road on the north side of Route 250, approximately 265 feet east of the Route 250 and Ivy Depot Road intersection. Certificates of appropriateness were previously issued for the existing fuel pump canopy and the refacing the pole mounted sign for the site. Staff did have several comments on the site, but none of them were significant enough from keeping us from recommending approval of the initial site plan. So I'm going to focus on the 5 points of discussion, 5 points that were listed as the primary points of discussion in the staff report. The design of the proposed addition significantly increases the mass of the building and is a utilitarian extension of the existing building. Its south-facing second story is a blank elevation. The side elevations, while not completely blank, the form is generic and has no architectural detailing that reflects the area's historic architecture. The utilitarian materials, concrete block and corrugated metal, though appropriate to the use and consistent with the west elevation of the building, which predates the entrance quarter, do not relieve the mass or scale. The light paint color proposed emphasizes the blocky character of the addition, and painting the red brick facade of the existing building removes a significant tie to the historic architecture of the county. The metal canopies proposed above the existing storefront windows and bays are an appropriate addition that help enhance the human scale. However, trimming the canopies in red and yellow stripes, in addition to the light paint color and the blue band proposed on the building, transforms the building into trademark architecture. Maintaining the red brick facade and replacing the blue band and color stripes with architectural details could help reduce the visual impact of the addition and improve the form, scale, and connection to the historic architecture of the area. Regarding the landscaping proposed for the site, the addition of the proposed planting islands along the frontage help provide space for the frontage landscaping to soften the appearance of the existing fuel pump canopy and fuel lane area and integrate the site into the surrounding area. However, there are a couple minor issues with the landscaping proposed, notably near the southwest corner of the site and the number in caliper and interior parking trees proposed. Staff is recommending revising the landscape plan to show additional trees and shrubs consistent with the rest of the proposal at the southwest corner of the site, and an additional interior parking tree and all interior parking trees at 2.5-inch caliper at time of planting. Lastly, while signage is reviewed and approved with a separate application, the color renderings appear to show a long cabinet style sign added to the south elevation of the existing building. This style sign is not appropriate for a wall sign in the entrance quarter. Staff is recommending approval of the initial site plan with the recommendations listed in the staff report to be addressed with the final site plan. I would be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Thank you very much, Chris. Fred, do you have any questions?
I don't.
No? Okay. Frank Stoner?
Oh, sorry. I don't.
Frank Hancock?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Chris is abstaining, so we'll turn to the applicant's presentation. Is there a representative from the applicant?
So, hi, I'm Scott Ram, the applicant. Mark and Scott Collins were supposed to be here to be part of the meeting. I know Scott Collins said he was out of town and didn't know whether he would have internet capability where he was going to be. I don't have information to present because this is not my field of expertise, so I don't know what I would be presenting.
Well,
Things that need to
fortunately,
be,
it does appear Mark and Scott have been able to call in.
they have?
Yes.
Okay, well, I would like Scott Collins to go first then.
Sounds good. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. On the review of the site aspects, elements of the project, I don't really think I have any real questions from staff, from Margaret. I think she had an excellent staff report. And I think the site pretty well addresses most of the ARB concerns, and I don't have any issues with the comments that Margaret issued forth. I think we probably want to spend most of the time talking about the building aspects of the project. But while we're on the site, I would like to share one element. We've modified the location of the dumpster, and if you guys would let me, I'd like to show that for you guys and see if that location is still suitable with everybody. If I can share my screen here. Where is it? Sorry, I'm looking for it. Can everybody see my screen?
It has started sharing, but the image is not here yet for me.
Oh, okay.
Scott, is this new location consistent with the one shown in the architectural render?
It's fairly similar, yes. So that's the one we want to go with. But this time I'll probably let Mark Kessner talk a lot about the building and how it relates to the entrance corridor based on the comments.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks for your time today. We're excited to get in front of you guys today and talk about this. Our intent with the building architecture has moved around a bit. And, I think redeveloping the entire site has forced us to be responsible with the dollars being spent on the building itself. So, we have attempted to get Scott ram his needs of the 4 new bays while connecting to the existing building with some masonry that'll provide a fire separation between existing and new. The intent of the paint scheme is to update the entire building and to give Scott and his presence there on 250 an updated look and feel. And we can talk about the colors. It's obviously the Napa brand colors. The striping and branding is specific to Napa. The canopy exists presently, which is a different brand. That's an Exxon brand. We're not proposing to change that. I know there was reference to that in the report, but the massing of the building is very simple. We're not changing the massing of the existing building at all. We're adding basically a box to the back and painting the scheme. So we feel that the landscaping and pretty much 100% redevelopment of the site is going to be the focus. And what you'll see when you drive by of the addition will be minimal. The goal is to have a clean, new, fresh presence for Scott's IBX on there on 250.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Any other elements you'd like to present today?
Nothing outside of what you have currently.
Well, thank you. We'll turn to questions then. Let's see, Frank Stoner, do you have any questions for the applicants?
No, I don't think so at this time. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the presentation, and Scott as well. I think the building colors are probably the only thing that I would have some questions about, but we can talk about that in discussion.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Frank Hancock.
Sure. Thanks, Mark and Scott, for the presentation. I guess just a quick question for Mark. Are there any other exterior windows to the second story other than the ones on, I guess, the east and west elevation? And then there's windows looking into the service bays. Is that what am I reading that correctly?
That's correct. There's a small second story over the masonry addition before you get into the metal part of the building, which is where the bays are. But the main reason for those openings is to provide some architectural element, articulation and fenestration, but also to let light, natural light into those work bays.
Thank you. That was the only question I had.
Thank you, Frank. Fred?
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Mark. Just a couple quick questions. One is the height of the addition. Is that, how was that determined? Is there any flexibility in that? I guess that's a question for Mark.
So the height is based on getting a certain size vehicle, which is a little bit larger than Scott can currently work on now. Some of these Sprinter vans that you see running around town are a little higher. And to be able to work on some of these automobiles, we had to have a higher ceiling height. Also, we're trying to keep the structure of the roof very simple. So it's a sloped truss, monoslope truss front to back. But that's basically driving the height. There's probably some flexibility, not a lot, but we'll take a look at it.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like from ARB 09, that sheet, it looks like it's rendered in brick. And it looks like it has a cornice across the top of some kind. Or I'm just trying to figure out what that is. It's not facing the entrance corridor, but it looks like it's brick.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Snyder. I'm also with Henningsen Kistner. Putting this together, the brick texture is incorrect. It is actually going to be a part of the middle building.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are the only questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. And thank you, Scott, Mark, and Scott, for your presentation. I guess a question for you, Scott Collins, in terms of the internal tree, with the 26-foot travel lane over on the, I guess, the east side of the building, would it be feasible to put a tree at the east end of the vending area for that third tree?
East end of where? I'm sorry.
Of the vending area.
Oh, the east end of vending area. We were trying to keep that area sort of clear for traffic movement. They have that's kind of the one main entrance into the site, and there's a lot of moving parts at that location. And we wanted to make sure the turning radiuses were in that location were wide enough for cars turning in, going to the pumps, cars going to the auto repair service area, and then also cars that are coming in making that turn, sort of that wide turn to go to the properties just east of the site, which services a water treatment facility for Albemarle County, as well as a adjacent property owner. So we were trying to kind of widen that area out and keep it open as best as possible to accommodate 3 sets of traffic movements.
Okay, and do those occur before folks get past the vending area? I guess the access to the water maintenance and things is before that passageway. Oh, yes, Scott.
Yeah.
So there's also large vehicles and tractor trailers that have to come through there. The fuel delivery truck, as well as the county, has tractor trailers that go to both places. And then we have large pickups and work trucks that come in with utility trailers that go around the building also. So having that as wide as possible would be very helpful. And if trees there, it's just going to get hit by those vehicles.
Okay, thank you. And then for Mark, have you given any consideration to windows or other relief in the I guess the south facing portion of the addition?
We're happy to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. And any alternative materials that you've considered besides painted brick and block?
We have considered a number of different materials and including masonry. we are where we are currently based on budget and trying to be responsible with the dollars that we're spending. And so we're proposing the masonry that connects to the building and then a rectangular structure of corrugated metal.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I have any further questions. I guess why don't we enter discussion? I'll turn first again to Frank Stoner.
Thanks, Dade. I think there's a lot of good things happening here. I think the island is a major improvement in the front of the site. I don't have major concerns about the massing of the addition or the landscaping. I think my only concern is over the color scheme. And it sounds like they're open to maybe exploring some other options there. I actually like the idea of painted brick and kind of unifying whatever it ends up being, kind of making it a more unified structure as opposed to keeping the brick in front and then putting painted block in the rear, which I don't think would look good. So I think if they're open to exploring maybe some other paint options or combinations, I think the colors are very bright and maybe could be toned down. I understand and respect the desire maybe for a more trademarked look to the building, which I don't necessarily see as a negative, but again, just had some concerns over the actual colors. And that's all for me.
Thank you. Frank Hancock.
Yes, I agree with Frank Stoner. I think the site plan is nice, definitely organizes the site, kind of cleans things up a bit. So I appreciate that. Don't have anything to add, to the staff report or to the comments in the staff report. I agree with the color comment about on the building. I think maybe there is it's maybe the rendering that's reading a certain way. I know it's really early, kind of schematic level. But I think if you start to add some of the detail, I know like the bronze cap at the back of the addition, I think that's called out, isn't really shown in the rendering. But my one thought is that south facade, if you could do some things to add some interest there and kind of relieve some of the blankness. That was really what my question was about. Is there any way to add some fenestration on that elevation? But yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you, Frank. Fred?
Thanks, Dave. So I agree with what's already been said. I think it does clean up the site a great deal. My areas of, I don't know, not concerned really, but focus are number one, what's been said, which is colors. And by colors, I think we're talking about just the color on the building, right? Because the canopy exists. So it's really just that blue essentially. And I don't know whether that means, there's an approved blue in Albemarle County that could be considered, or, how you look at that, or if it becomes more of just a tan that blends in, but that's not up to me. The one thing that is a bit of a concern or focus is something that Dave brought up, which is that 38-foot travelway and the height of the building. Those are kind of two thoughts. So if the height can be mitigated and can be reduced, that would be, I think, a win. Even if you can get 6 inches out of it, whatever can help to reduce the scale of that, I think would be helpful. One thing that doesn't show up, I think, real clearly in the renderings is the view that you'll actually have westbound through that 38-foot slot at the rear side of the building. I think that's going to be full on and very visible. So, it doesn't look like there's any landscape to break that up between there and the view shed. And my only thought was, is there a way that that 38 feet can be reduced? Again, even just a little bit to try to help with that, because I think that's where the primary view is going to be. And then related to that, if that can't happen, if it's one way out and it's 28 feet on the west side, is there a way that could be reduced a little bit to, and maybe not, but just throwing that out there to help sort of add a little bit more landscape area and a little bit less pavement. And those are the only comments I had.
Thank you very much, Fred. And I share very much my fellow board members' observations. I think that the overall planting and landscaping will be an improvement. I think, as Fred said, if there's a way to reduce the travel lanes and still meet, obviously, the vehicular needs, I think that might allow even greater improvement in that landscaping. I think, like Frank and others, I'm concerned about the color, and I appreciate the applicant's willingness maybe to consider alternative approaches to the palette. I think I understand, as Frank said, the impulse to sort of unify the building and bring it together, although I wonder if there's not an opportunity to create some slight separation and subtle distinction between the two pieces, so that the historic development of the site and the presence of the original Ivy Exxon building can still read. I think there might be some opportunity there to create some richness. And I do think, from looking at the corridor more extensively recently, that there are some examples of painted brick, probably just because of how they've been maintained. They are now quite weathered, and I think that's maybe more contextual if you do go with a painted brick to have an approach that has more texture and weathering to it. But also, I think most buildings seem to be somewhat recessive in terms of how they sit in the landscape. And so the bright white, I agree, I think is a little jarring. So either looking at natural or other more subdued tones might be a way to I think, help the building sit more subtly in its context. Let's see. And then again, I understand the firewall and the limitations that makes on opening sizes, but to the extent some relief and articulation of that wall, I think at the south may further help tie it in. Great. Well, thank you again for the proposal. So we'll turn now to staff's recommendations.
Are you able to see the list of comments?
Yes, thank you, Margaret.
Okay. So just as a reminder, this is an initial site plan. So in the first bullet, the recommendation is for approval of the initial plan. And then at the fourth bullet is the list of more specific comments to be addressed in the future submittal.
So perhaps, I don't know, Fred, to your comment about the travelway, without dictating changes to those, would you want to add anything to this to articulate that?
Well, I was looking at number 4. That kind of, highlights the need to really understand the views from those areas. So maybe in that we could say, reduce travelways as much as possible to reduce visibility of additions from entrance corridor.
That seems clear to me.
Maybe reduce width of travelways. Great.
Any other suggestions that folks would offer?
Is there anything in there that mentions to consider reduction in the height of the addition? I'd like to add that.
Yes, that's a good addition to Fred. Thank you.
Do you want to add there also something about adding fenestration or other detailing to the south elevation?
I think so, yes, that would be great, Margaret. Great. Any other elements of the comments that folks would like to see reflected? Margaret, I don't know if we can go back to your presentation screen.
Tell Bill we said hi.
Could not figure out how to get rid of that cough. Let me stop sharing and reshare. Sorry about that. I don't know how to stop that completely. Let's go back to share. Are you able to see it again?
Yep.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay. Did you want to add anything specific about materials?
I guess under
Colors.
item 2 or 3. I don't know if folks want to add anything. I mean, personally, I think either retaining the natural brick and or using a natural tone CMU would likely be more appropriate. And the paint, if painted, I think a weathered approach to painting that has more texture would be more appropriate. But I think the comments in our discussion are perhaps adequate without adding that to the.
Yeah, I would agree. I think 2 conveys that in a general sense.
And in terms of the dumpster, it's in my mind's eye, I would agree that I think the location that's shown in the architectural renderings is more appropriate than the one that was shown in the site plan that we reviewed. Great. Any further revisions? Do we have a motion? Or
Do we need a motion on the
initial site plan?
initial site plan? Okay. I'll move that we forward the recommendation outlined in the staff report to the agent of the site committee. Amended as follows. Item number 3, add the sentence, the location shown in the architectural renderings is more appropriate than the one in the site plan. Item 4, add the sentence, reduce width of travelways as much as possible to reduce visibility of the addition from the entrance corridor. And add number 15 to say, consider a reduction in the height of the addition as well as fenestration or other detailing to the south elevation.
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
and Mr. Missile,
Aye.
and Mr. Hensington abstained.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you all. Thank you to the applicant. So our next item is ARB 2020-127 Wawa at Prophet Road Amendment. Turn it over to you, Chris.
Are you all able to view the correct screen?
Yes, thank you.
A letter of revision to the ARB approved site plan has been submitted for the Wawa under construction at Route 29 Profit Road intersection. The following changes are requested to accommodate Tesla charging stations and related mechanical equipment. Adding 8 charging stations along the road parking adjacent to Profit Road, installing related mechanical equipment on the south side of the dumpster enclosure, and potentially painting the equipment to match the brick of the enclosure, and adding 2 Dominion Power transformers directly west of the road parking adjacent to Profit Road. The amendment also calls for the relocation of landscaping. This includes shifting a number of the trees and shrubs south of the fuel pump canopy to the west, and relocating 1 ornamental tree and 3 shrubs originally proposed along the road parking and dumpster enclosure adjacent to Profit Road to the revised planting area near the southwest corner of the site. Amendment also includes a 2-foot retaining wall that wraps around the south and west ends of the transformers to accommodate the proposed grading change. Staff notes the following factors to be considered. The height, approximately 5.5 feet, and white color of the proposed charging stations. Charging stations will tend to make them more visible in the site. The equipment attached to the dumpster enclosure is relatively small, located approximately 305 feet from the entrance quarter, and if painted to match the enclosure, is expected to have a minimum visual impact. The shifting the landscaping south of the fuel pump canopy to the west results in a larger gap, approximately 135 feet, between the large trees along Profit Road and the tight spacing of the trees near the southwest corner of the site. The review of the Wawa proposal generated considerable discussion about the visibility, equipment, and landscaping and general appearance. So we're looking for direction on how to deal with the requested revisions to the site plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on this amendment.
Thank you very much, Chris. Turning to Fred.
Sorry, Frank or Fred?
I believe to Fred. Yes.
Fred, okay. No questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
No questions for me.
Thank you, Frank Hancock.
No questions. Thanks, Chris.
And Frank Stoner.
Just one question about the elevation of the parking area relative to 29, where the Tesla charging stations are proposed to be located. Can you give a sense of what that grade change is there?
Goes from grade change between 2 and 4 feet.
2 and 4 feet between 29 and the
29. 8 to 10 feet between 29 and the locations of charging stations.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. I guess following on that, and how far below Profit Road are they?
That would be between 2 and 4 feet.
2 and 4, okay. And thank you for highlighting the discussion. My recollection was that in terms of that planting, there was already some discussion of a little bit of relief in the requirements because of coordination with utilities. Is it fair to say that the initial site plan that was approved incorporated larger gaps than strict conformance with the guidelines would require?
Yes. Yeah, it was at least along Profit Road. Originally it was approved at approximately 103 feet. And as I noted in the presentation, it increased to 135 between the ones closer to the southwest corner of the site and that parking island.
Great, thank you. Well, let's see, do we have a presentation from the applicant? Carolyn and Margaret, is there a representative for the applicant?
I think that Brandy Booker is here to talk about that.
Sorry, this is Jonathan Ritchie with Bel Air Engineering. I was having some technical difficulties there.
Are you here to speak about the Wawa?
Yes, this is Jonathan Ritchie with Bowler Engineering, representing Tesla and Wawa in this scenario. So I'm certainly here to answer any questions that you may have. I got booted off for a second, so I lost the last couple minutes there.
Great. All right. Well, are there any questions for the applicant? We'll start with Chris.
No, I don't have any questions. Thanks.
Frank Hancock.
Yes. Hey, Jonathan. Just maybe remind us, and then it's tough to tell with the landscape plan. There's a lot of utilities in that zone. Is there an easement behind the dumpster, or excuse me, behind the new retaining wall?
Yeah. So you know, I apologize if I missed my opportunity to give the kind of little introduction, but one of the things that we're really fighting in this case here is it wasn't in the original site plan because it wasn't constructed at the time, but there's the city of Charlottesville constructed a gas line behind the curb that runs effectively along Prophet Road. It is shown in the site plans that we provided to the county and the ARB. So what we're dealing with is trying to, we have to stay at least 4 feet off that gas line. We've coordinated extensively with the city regarding that. And we've really maxed out of where we can place landscaping in that I think staff report says 135 feet. I was getting closer to 100 through there. So when we went into this, our intent was, let's not lose any landscaping. Where can we find places to put it? So that was our intent that we came in with. We kept the exact same amount of landscaping that was approved originally with the site plan, and we tried to find spots for it. You can see that it's difficult, and we kind of ran out of space to do that. But we are, there is a gas line that runs behind the curb, behind the Tesla infrastructure that really runs all along Prophet Road now. That was not part of the original site plan because the city just relocated that.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yep.
I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Frank Stoner.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Fred.
No questions, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, Jonathan, I guess one question is in terms of the choice of where to locate the Tesla chargers and spaces, is there a particular reason that these southern spaces are preferred? For example, could the far eastern spaces be designated for them where this equipment might be more removed from the corridor and screened by the building?
So they do, there's a couple things there. They are accessible, ADA accessible. So that area has an accessible path to the building. Putting it behind the building, technically, you know, you're supposed to have a direct path to the building or to the entrance. And if you put those there, we would have grading difficulties, and they're, you know, physically located further away from the entrance to the building. Secondly, you know, we do like to put them, you know, kind of in with the air stations as well. So we thought that area would be a good spot. Also going back to the east side, not sure if you have in front of you, but there's a retaining wall that drops down, and the physical space between where that retaining wall is and the curb is actually even less than what we're dealing with now. So we're not sure the infrastructure would even fit for Tesla. So kind of all those factors are why those are placed there. Obviously, they're not going to put them right in the front of the building because there is a time component to charging the vehicles. So they do need to be kind of to the side and, you know, not in the main area if possible.
Thank you for that explanation. Is the entrance that appears to be in the building to the east, that is a secondary entrance, I guess, in terms of accessibility purposes, but is that available to everybody from the east side of the building?
That's a back of house. So that's
Okay.
Yeah, maintenance and loading zone and stuff like that. Yes,
I see.
It's not a
So there's not
physical
passage through the
entrance.
building. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Great. I don't have any further.
I will add one thing too, just to what Mr. Stoner was saying there was, if you look at the grade differential, and I know we kind of went through a lot of this in the original ARB stuff, if you look at the grade differential, certainly from the intersection of Profit and 29, you're not going to see these. They're physically 10 feet lower. And then when you add landscaping shrubbery, you're not going to see them. As you go down Profit, you might get a glimpse of them, one of the last two ones. So they're really going to be screened well from the road, other than just a few towards the to the dumpster location there.
Thank you, Jonathan. And you mentioned you may have missed your presentation opportunity for it. Is there anything further that you want to present this afternoon?
No, I was able to, I think the big thing I wanted to explain with what Mr. Hancock said there was let you guys know there is this new gas line behind there that's restricting it. And then also kind of mention the grade differential. So those are the main points I wanted to get across of kind of how we came up with the design and where it all fits in place.
Thank you very much. Carolyn, are there any members of the public wishing to comment? Carolyn,
No, sir,
maybe-
there isn't.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
We'll turn to discussion. Fred?
I don't have any issues with this. I think it's going to be minimally visible. The initial concern I had was the view of the transformers, but I think that's going to be mitigated by all of the other things in front of it. So I would be supportive of this change as it's shown.
Thank you, Fred. Frank Hancock.
I agree. I just have one comment. I think maybe consider a different shrub species, an evergreen that I think behind the charging stations, between the charging stations and Prophet Road, it's a winterberry holly. It's a deciduous holly. But I mean, I think it's helpful that those are down the hill, but I think year round, I'd like to see an evergreen if that's possible.
Thank you, Frank. Frank Stoner.
Thanks, Dave. I would agree with both my colleagues. I don't have any heartburn over the proposal in general. I think the grades are such, even along Profit, that they're not going to be highly noticeable. But I do agree with Frank Hancock. I think if you could, I think an evergreen shrub would help just make up the shroud that 2.5 feet of the charging stations that would be visible. Would kind of take care of those year round.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. And Chris, any comments?
Yeah, I am fully in agreement also. I don't have a problem with the addition. I particularly the lowered kind of position of it in relation to the corridor and Prophet Road. I don't think it's going to be visible. The one just not even concern I had was the talking about the equipment that's going up against the wall. It's been said that could be painted to match the wall color. I think if you actually did paint it to match the wall color, that would be good. And that's my only comment.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris Taggart, I realized one question I forgot to ask you. Prophet Road is not currently an entrance corridor, correct? Yeah, okay, thank you. No, I agree with my colleagues. I think that the other screening in the grade will effectively limit the impact of this on the designated entrance corridor. I do think if Prophet Road were an entrance corridor, we might need to revisit these more closely in the same way we have been with vacuum equipment and other things going close to the roadway. But in this instance, I agree it's appropriate. Why don't we turn now to review the staff recommendations?
Sounds like everyone is in agreement with what's proposed. One possible comment or condition would be to to definitely paint the equipment that's being attached to the dumpster screen. Not sure if everyone is supporting of that. If that was something everyone wanted, then we could add that as a condition. Otherwise, it sounds like just need a motion to approve the amendment as it was proposed.
I would support that addition.
I would as well. Does the amendments or do the notes include the comment that Frank Hancock made about evergreens?
Oh, we could add that one too.
Thank you. That's another good one. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Frank.
So I've added two conditions of approval. One, paint the equipment attached to the dumpster wall to match the dumpster wall. And two, revise the shrubs along the charging stations to an evergreen species.
Thank you, Margaret. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the proposed amendment with the following conditions. Item 1, paint the equipment attached to the dumpster wall to match the dumpster wall. And item 2, revise the shrubs along the charging stations to an evergreen species.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Missile.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We'll move now to other business. We have two other business items scheduled for today, and Margaret Malazuski will be presenting. We'll begin with ARB 2020-69 sleep number.
Are you able to see my slide?
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the sleep number development that's proposed for the east side of the Route 29 entrance corridor, just south of the Fashion Square Mall, it received our final approval on November 30th of last year. Approved materials included master wall stucco wall panels in a tan color, wood tone lap siding in summer wheat, and metal wall panels in a dark blue. The applicant has proposed a change to replace the blue metal panels with additional master wall stucco panels in the same shade of blue. The metal panels and what would be the additional stucco are the areas that appear as dark blue or maybe even almost black, depending on your monitor, in these perspective images. I'll just run through a few images for you. And so the dark blue color is what was proposed as metal. The brown color is the wood siding, and the lighter tan color is what was originally proposed as the stucco panels. So replacing the metal with stucco makes stucco and glass the primary materials on the entrance quarter elevation and on the south elevation. And it makes stucco the primary material on the north elevation. EIFS and similar stucco type products have typically not been considered as appropriate as the primary building material for buildings that are readily visible from the entrance corridor. So staff wasn't comfortable approving this change. We didn't feel it was consistent with the guidelines or with past practice, and we're concerned about establishing inappropriate precedents. So today we're looking for your direction on this proposal for material change.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. So any questions for staff, beginning with Fred?
I'm sorry, did you say me?
Yes, sorry, Fred.
sound cut out. I guess the only question I have, and I'm trying to pull the images back up on my,
I can share again.
yeah, you mentioned that they all show up as black on both of my monitors. So I'm trying to really track what's changing. Is it all of the dark areas, even the horizontals, the narrow horizontals?
So let me try and jump ahead. Can you see my screen again? Yeah. Okay. Yep. So, and certainly let applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. What I've done in this very rough sketch, and I apologize for the roughness of it, but the light blue was the originally proposed stucco, and the dark blue was the metal panels that would now switch to blue stucco. So this is the entrance quarter elevation. This is the south elevation and the north elevation. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. That helps a lot. Thank you. That's my only question. I had one for the applicant, but I can hold on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Frank Hancock.
No questions for staff. Thank you, Margaret.
Frank Stoner.
I don't have any questions either. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Margaret, I guess, do I recall correctly, not for this site specifically, but when we were looking at guidelines for the small area plan and 29, I recall that material quality did come up as an item for that. And as I recall vaguely, it was the consensus last year, at least for that area, that ethos and stucco were not suitable primary building materials. Is that correct?
That is part of what was presented, and that actually will be coming back to you all, I think, our next meeting for final recommendations on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, turning to the applicant for a presentation, Mark.
Thank you again. The reason for the material change, there are no surprises. We've hit some bumps here with pricing, and due to COVID, we priced this building out pre-COVID, and then we went through the site plan ARB process, and so the actual numbers came back, and the metal panels turned out to be extremely expensive. So our goal from our office was to advocate to keep the massing, keep the lion's share of the materials, the architectural intent of the building exactly the same, down to the articulation of the joints. So our proposal is to switch from the metal panel to a stucco finish, but for all intents, the building architecture has remained the same. And I think the blending of the glass, the wood tones, and the stucco will have the same ending result as the previously approved submission. And I don't know how, I understand the comment about the majority or the main material, if you will. It's hard for us to kind of calculate what that is. There's a blend of materials here, and I don't know that, if the glass is probably the main, the most coverage on the front elevation facing Route 29, but we're asking for some relief here to help move this project forward. We worked really hard with the developer and the contractors to keep the building intact as much as possible. And this was one area where we could achieve a tangible savings that afforded us to keep some other elements in the building.
Thank you, Mark. Any other items you'd like to present?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll turn to members for their questions, starting with Frank Hancock.
Just curious, Mark, did you consider this material change on, it looks like the rear elevation has a lot of the stucco. You know, there's a couple sides to this building that really, or areas of this building that won't be that visible from the corridor. And I'm just curious if you weighed it from that lens of like, you know, is there a way to do some of this material change that isn't, you know, that are in portions of or on portions of the building that aren't that visible?
So we don't have any on the rear elevation proper that faces the hillside. There's a very small amount of this material which we did change, but for the most part, the rear elevation has the tan stucco that was previously approved. The fin and the piece that wraps over top of the roof would be changed to the new material. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I should have looked a little closer to see which color that was, but thank you. I guess you see what I'm getting at. No more questions.
Thank you, Frank. Frank Stoner.
Mark, I'm just trying to reconcile the architectural drawings with the rendering. And I guess I'm not completely sure I understand as you migrate from metal to stucco, for example, with the canopy overhangs, which appear to wrap the building on at least on three sides. The edge of the canopy would be dark blue. The underside would be what?
Hi there, Caleb Snyder again. The underside we've sourced as, I believe it's, we've been saying that it's hardy soffit panels in the summer wheat color. So the same color that you see as the horizontal banding, the wood-ish color would be the same material on the undersides of all the canopies.
I see.
It's not, I don't believe it's very clear in the renderings. You might get it on ARB.14 if you can zoom in on that top left corner of the rendering, but otherwise I understand if it's not extremely visible.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the renderings now. What you're saying, it's 14, 13?
14 or 16.
Yeah, you can't really, yeah, you can see a little bit, I guess. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Fred, any questions?
Yeah, just one thing I'll mention, and I totally get it, coming from where you guys are coming from in terms of costs. Things are absolutely crazy right now, so I completely understand. I think the balance, you know, the challenge is always what Margaret sort of alluded to, which is setting precedent, right? And you don't want to, I mean, this has always been the issue on the ARB, is how do you balance somebody's obvious budget, which is really not our problem, as you know, with the idea of, you know, the aesthetic and the entrance corridor. So that said, first of all, my question earlier was going to be about the joints. If you maintain the joints, and it sounds like you are, and you're maintaining the architectural integrity, which is great. The one thing that stood out to me, and maybe this is just me, but, and Frank, you were touching on it, the horizontal face of each of the canopies, that long kind of horizontal strip, narrow strip, feels odd to me as stucco. It feels like would make more sense as metal. And I'm wondering if you could do something with those horizontal bands that differentiated them from the vertical tower pieces that could go to ephes or stucco. And I'm trying to think of a way that you can kind of meet budget requirements, but also maintain some of the aesthetic integrity to help with longer term precedent issues. So I guess that's a question. Had you thought about considering something different there? Or Frank, Stoner, you made me think of this, replacing some of that higher cost material under the canopies and increasing some of the cost on the vertical faces.
Yeah, sorry to jump back in. You've hit on kind of my concern, and I guess have one follow-up question as it relates to those horizontal bands, because I think there's flashing that comes down over the top of that horizontal band, which is in like a dark bronze, maybe. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so those bands, which appear in the rendering to be solid color, actually will have a brown strip at the top.
Yes.
And I don't know how much exposed horizontal that is, but to Fred's point, it doesn't seem like a lot.
It is, oh dear, it's in front of my computer. 10 inches. So the brown is 6 inches, the dark blue will be 10 inches.
So it's 16 inches total?
Yes.
Vertical.
Yes.
Well, Fred, I think you summed it up well. Yeah, and I think we're all observing lots of volatility in the market. Yeah, to your point, and Margaret, it's about precedent, trying to figure out how to weigh the right balance. And I appreciate all of your remarks about, are there other ways to adjust the mix and the blends, so that you could still respect the budget. Certainly appreciate the effort that I know you've put into maintaining the architectural intent. But are there some further sort of adjustments in the blend that might allow you to retain some more either metal panel or other slightly more refined material on the EC side, perhaps on the great gateway frame around the corner and the horizontal elements, and preserve more of that quality facing the EC. So I don't know, Mark and Caleb, if there are any other alternatives you've considered or opportunities you think there may be.
So we did consider a number of different materials. We looked at the entire building. We looked at CMU, we looked at split face, we looked at Hardy, we looked at a number of different opportunities. And what we realized was that in order to sort of preserve 90% of the building as we had it, the best solution that we could come up with was to swap the metal panel for what we think stucco is a very nice and lasting material. It's, in our opinion, is not a, we're trading one 50-year material for another 50-year material. One just costs less than the other. So the other thing that I forgot to mention, and I don't know if this came through in the proposal, and I don't know if this matters or not, the finish of the texture of the two stuccos will be different. The tan is more of is a little bit more of a rough textured finish, and the dark blue will be a very fine sand. So the goal is still to have the building read with the glass, the wood, a tan stucco element, and a blue stucco element, which we intend to have a little bit more refined finish to it. And I don't know, it's a tough spot, because I'm with you guys. I don't want to set a bad precedent. But at the same time, I think that stucco is a very reasonable material and a long-lasting material if it is applied correctly and flashed correctly. And we've gone to great lengths. We haven't shown you our construction details, which we've worked on parallel to this exercise, in hoping that you guys would give us a nod today. We've worked diligently to make sure that our installation of the stucco will be a long-lasting finish.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions for the applicant? Carolyn, do we have any members of the public wishing to comment?
No, sir, we don't.
Thank you. We'll move into discussion. Fred?
I always hate going first. So, I mean, I don't know what other things I can share other than what I've mentioned. You know, I would want to be convinced, and Mark, you know, I understand the applicant's comments about trading out one 50-year material for another 50-year material. I've also done plenty of buildings in this kind of stucco that don't look great after 15 or 20 years. So I think it's kind of a trade-off, but maybe they're just not well maintained. So, you know, I would sort of still like to understand more if there is an option about creating some of the pieces out of a vertical, something different, especially with what Frank Stoner mentioned, which is, and the clarification we got from Caleb, you know, the really 2/3 are going to be the blue and the rest of the third is going to be a brown flashing piece. So it'll be narrower anyway. So maybe it's not an issue. I'm rambling because I'm not sure I have an answer. What I would want to do, just so I could sleep at night personally, is to be able to look at this and say, yeah, this works. I don't care if the stucco costs 15 times more than the metal panels, right? It shouldn't be about money. It should be more about whether this works aesthetically and architecturally. So I would want to get to a point where I was convinced that was the case. And you know, I also am humbled by the experts in front of me, so I would defer to many of them. But my sense is really more focusing on those horizontal elements and wondering about that specifically.
Thank you, Fred. Frank Hancock.
I was hoping I'd be the second Frank to go, Dave. Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. I think, you know, it was maybe the way to think about it is forget about what was approved and just think about what's in front of us. You know, and is the integrity there? Is it still appropriate? Or is there, you know, to me, I kept thinking, well, is it just we're a work session away from exploring a few options? And, you know, maybe there's another alternative that we all say, we're all aghast and man, that was really good how you had it before. So I'm hesitant to say this is appropriate as it is now, but maybe there's some questions that we've raised today. If they were answered, we could move forward, or I could feel good about that, but I don't know if that's helpful at all. Do you have a question?
So one thing that I feel I should say when we're talking, and I agree that money is sort of different in the aesthetics, but for one thing, and I believe someone mentioned this and I can't remember who, but the division of the panels themselves was a large part in the visual design of, I guess, the window placement, the window organization and layout and rhythm of everything. It all meshes and seams together very well mathematically with the panel sizes. So that's why we went with ACM panels in the beginning, because we thought that one, the material would be appropriate with the divisions of that we have in the elevations. However, married to the cost part of it, ACM panels are, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to anyone here, but ACM panels over specific sizes by manufacturers are significantly cost prohibitive, especially when they come in custom colors as well. So not saying that that's an excuse for anything that we've done, but that is a significant reason why, along with other material explorations that we've done with fiber cement and Nijiha and everything else that we've done, this material is one of the biggest reasons why we can keep our panel rhythm and size. Stucco allows us to keep that division that we were going for with the metal panel. And the thinness, to keep going on that, and I'll stop talking quickly, the thinness of the panel of that canopy along the side, the 10-inch height of it is fine, but again, it comes down to, I think, anywhere from 48 to 52 inches length that would be more difficult to manufacture. That's all I have to say.
Caleb, for that additional perspective. Frank Stoner.
I will echo my colleagues. Am I muted? No.
Let me hear you.
Sorry. I understand. I understand the cost issues, and I'm sensitive to those. And I think the stucco panels work fine on the verticals. I continue to have some concern about the narrow horizontals and how those actually get executed. And maybe once stucco details are there, it'll be easier to understand that. But it's, as I think about that horizontal band and how those joints actually carry around the bottom of that horizontal, and how does the stucco terminate up into the roof panel or the ceiling panel, all that kind of, I guess makes me somewhat hesitant to just jump in and say, yeah, this will work great. On the other hand, I think the overall architectural feel of the building is good. Interestingly, in the rendered versions of this, the Sleep Number logo shows up in, I believe, that the correct blue. As I look at the building, I actually like the black. I worry about what that looks like if all this becomes blue. Everything that shows up as black becomes blue. Again, it'd be nice maybe to see it accurately rendered, the color accurately rendered, and some of those stucco details. And are the window frames black, or are they blue as well? Sorry to.
We were anticipating those to be a bronze color as well. So the bronze of the windows would match the bronze of that horizontal cap on the canopies. I
see. Yeah, so it'd be helpful to see a rendering that was a little more accurate. But I'm certainly sensitive to the cost issues of the metal panel system, and I think it behooves us to work with you guys to find a solution. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that is, but and again, I can be convinced that the stucco, certainly on the verticals, the stucco feels appropriate to me, less so on the horizontals.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for all my colleagues' remarks. I think, like my fellow board members, I think I'm concerned about the precedent, and while I would agree that stucco, when handled well, can be a good building material, frequently it's not. And I think all the projects in the entrance corridors face budgetary issues, and we certainly want to encourage high quality construction materials throughout. And so want to be sure we don't lower the bar. I do think that your insistence on keeping the jointing pattern helps mitigate one of the big concerns with stucco normally is that it can be pretty scaleless, without articulation. And so that probably for me could be a mitigating factor in this. Although I think like Frank Stoner and others, I am concerned about how the horizontals and soffits can resolve effectively in this material. I wonder, like Frank Hancock, if perhaps a work session may be helpful, or alternatively to help me sleep as well at night as Fred, some more reassurance through clearer renderings, maybe that can better articulate and express what we are contemplating approving, would be helpful. Similarly, if there's an opportunity to explore retaining some of the metal panel at the horizontals and perhaps at some of the more significant vertical elements, that may be another way to preserve more of the character on the entrance corridor. But I don't know if at the moment it feels like there's a proposal or an easily articulated alternative to approve. Let's say any other comments from my fellow board members before we review the staff recommendations. Margaret, I guess in terms of possible motions, you had noted approval of the proposal as submitted or with revisions. So I guess there are. Yeah. So I suspect based on today's discussion, we're looking at the second option.
So I've just been typing up these comments as I've been hearing them. Let me just run through this and if this is accurate or if you want to make revisions. It sounds like we have a few comments to provide the applicant for another submittal, which could be reviewed in a work session. And those comments are: number one, consider further adjustments in the blend of materials to retain more metal or incorporate another more refined material at the corner and at the horizontal elements and possibly some of the vertical elements. Two, provide stucco details showing how the stucco will be a long-lasting material. And three, accurate color renderings would be helpful.
Thank you, Margaret. I think you captured a lot of the key points very well. Are there others that members would like to include?
That looks good.
Wonderful. Do we have a motion? Do we need a motion, Margaret?
I don't think you need one, but it would certainly make things clear if you wanted to go ahead and do that.
I guess it kind of goes without saying that the color renderings that we're talking about are the ones that are from the entrance corridor.
Yes.
I don't know if that saves any work or not. But. What's our motion? I'm sorry. I'm happy
moved.
I moved to provide the following comment.
I think so.
Okay. I'll read them in. I moved to provide the following comments for the applicant's next submittal, which can be reviewed in a work session. Number one, consider further adjustments in the blend of materials to retain more metal or incorporate another more refined material at the corner and at the horizontal elements and possibly some of the vertical elements. Provide stucco. Number two, provide stucco details showing how the stucco will be long-lasting material. Number three, accurate color renderings showing views from the entrance corridor street would be helpful.
Thank you, Fred. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Missel,
Aye.
Mr. Hensington abstained.
Great. Thank you all. And thank you to the applicant. We have one other business item for today, an update on the entrance corridor arterials that Margaret will provide.
pull up a quick presentation. Do you see my PowerPoint slide?
Yep, yes.
Great, okay. So as you know, as we've discussed previously, some of the streets that are currently listed in our ordinance as entrance corridor streets do not have the arterial designation that's required by state code to be an entrance corridor. This slide shows on the right side a list of the non-arterial streets, and those are shown on the left side in red. So in the past several months, we've done some research and some coordination, and we've considered a variety of factors. We've looked at things like the number of ARB applications that are received on these various streets, the visual characteristics of the streets. You know, is it primarily commercial development? Is it rural? Is it scenic? Is it historic? We've considered the previous county's scenic highway designation. We've talked to a representative from VDOT. We've looked at comp plan recommendations. So after all this, now we are ready and want to present to you today staff's recommendations for dealing with these non-arterial streets and segments. So for 4 of the non-arterial streets, we are recommending that they be upgraded to arterial status. Those are the ones that are circled in green in this slide, and they include the full length of Avon Street extended, Barracks Road from the city limits to Georgetown Road, Thomas Jefferson Parkway, Route 53 for the full length, and Richmond Road, Route 250 East from Route 22 to the county line. We are also recommending that the county consider reestablishing a county scenic highway designation. That would be for the streets that are shown circled in brown in this slide. They include Barracks Road beyond Georgetown Road, the full length of Route 6, Louisa Road, Route 22 from Route 22 from Route 231 to the county line, Stony Point Road, which is Route 20, that would be north of Prophet Road to the county line. And you also have Route 53 in this list as well. It would be a recommendation for the full length if arterial status is not achieved. And finally, we would be recommending that the county consider historic district designation for Route 53 if the arterial status is not achieved. So we will be presenting these recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on February 3rd. We'll be requesting a resolution of intent to request the arterial designations that we've outlined, and we'll request direction on the scenic highway and historic district designations. So today, what we'd like is your comments on those recommendations. Do you support them? Do you have alternate recommendations? Do you have concerns, comments, suggestions? Any comments you'd like to provide? We're happy to carry those along to the Board of Supervisors in February. This is a list of the recommendations that I just went through. I can leave these on the screen while we talk, or pull up some other image if you like. Try to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret, and very nice presentation. Fred, any questions?
Yeah, I just couple big picture questions and a couple of smaller minor questions. In terms of the process, I remember, this has been something that gets revisited right over every year or so. And I remember in the past that there was maybe some concern by landowners that adjoined these roadways, that if these were reclassified, if that's the right term, that it would result in a higher level of scrutiny and process. And I'm wondering what process has been undertaken to notify any of the community members of these intents?
Well, this would be going to the board in February, and so that public meeting would be an opportunity for everyone to listen and to comment. Really, in February, we're asking the board for direction on how to proceed. So the arterial designation process is has like a 6 or 7 step process with VDOT and FHWA, and for one of these streets or segments to become an arterial, it would have to meet all of those standards, and VDOT reviews those streets for their functional classification regularly. So I'm not sure exactly when the next regular cycle would be, but this would be a request that we would put in, and it would just have to, if they decide to do it, it follows those standard procedures. If the board wants us to start to consider the county scenic highway designation and the historic district designation, that is a multi-step process that would have public hearings. We're not ready to jump into that yet. Really what we're asking for in February is direction for whether or not they want us to start considering it.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then just one out of curiosity, since admittedly it's relatively close to home for me, Route 631 didn't end up being designated as a scenic highway or recommended as a scenic highway. I'm just curious why.
That is a good question.
I think it's the only one that didn't, right?
Let me look back at that. I don't have the big table where we had everything all scribbled in and all the items that we were looking at. Let me double check that and see if I might have just missed that.
Okay.
I'm happy to, let me double check on that.
Thanks, no problem. That's it for me. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Frank Hancock.
Thanks, Margaret. This is great visuals. Just curious, do we have any role in reviewing anything in on a scenic highway or historic district?
We don't know the answer to that yet, since we don't have those regulations in place. The process for reviewing any sort of development along that type of corridor, that's one of the things that we would have to be considering, researching, looking into, revising the ordinance to address that. So there would be somebody, presumably, that would have a review of some aspect of development in those areas, but we don't know what that is yet, or if it will be at all.
Okay. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Frank. Frank Stoner.
Margaret, do we know whether the 4 roads that we intend to pursue arterial status for actually qualify under VDOT's guidelines already? Like, do we know the answer to that question, or are we putting them on because we need more clarification from them?
We had preliminary discussions with VDOT, and those discussions suggest that VDOT is in agreement with our recommendations on Avon Street, Barracks Road, and 250 East. They're not quite so sure about Route 53, but just given the fact that some of our primary historic resources are along Route 53, and because the basis of the enabling legislation is the historic character, it feels like we should at least ask for that.
And I guess on corridors which are primarily residential in character, would that are shown on here, and So that's probably Route 20 North, 53, any of these areas that further out in the county you get. Would this designation require residential properties somebody who wants to build a house would need to submit and be approved under by the ARB if it had arterial status?
We have had no discussion suggesting that the entrance corridor regulations would be increased for the new designations. So individual
No residential review.
family detached residences don't get reviewed by the ARB.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Chris, any questions?
Yeah, well, just more of a clarification. All of these roads are currently designated by the county as entrance corridors. Is that correct? Or is this a precursor to having them be designated as entrance corridors?
They are all currently designated as entrance corridors.
So this is more, and that was kind of my understanding. So the requirements for review are there now. We're just getting our ducks in a row as far as you know, the state in terms of the arterial status. So I just wanted to make sure this wasn't, you know, increasing a requirement for review that wasn't there now. And I didn't think it was, but just wanted to make sure.
We're trying to correct that error that was made when the corridors were originally designated.
All right, thanks.
Good. Margaret, I guess just to clarify, my understanding is that if the state, in this case, doesn't approve it if it's not an approved entrance corridor under state guidelines, then the county can enforce entrance corridor guidelines under county regulations, something to that effect. Is that?
Yeah,
I remember when this happened, all of a sudden we had applications that were pending on Avon Street, for example, we no longer have jurisdiction over.
Right. We have not been applying entrance corridor regulations to the streets or the segments that are in red in that slide since we discovered the error. It's just, they're still listed in the ordinance, and so we have to go through a process to the board, we believe the board wants us to pursue these options for dealing with the various corridors. And once we figure out what the answers are, then we need to go back and amend the ordinance.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Margaret. And thank you also for a better understanding of what process might be involved in steps after any kind of action by us today, as well as the open nature of what county scenic highway and historic district designation might mean for our or some other bodies' enforcement. Let's see, Carolyn, are there any members of the public wishing to comment?
No, so there isn't at this time.
Okay, thank you. We can go into discussion. Start again with Fred.
Thanks. I don't have anything to add. I'm fully supportive of this.
Thank you, Fred. Frank Hancock.
I agree with Fred. Staff has done all the heavy lifting. So thank you, Margaret, and your team.
Chris, any discussion?
No, I'm also in agreement. I think this is a good thing.
Thank you, Frank Stoner.
I guess the only comment I would make is that if we don't, some of these corridors don't really have any or have very little commercial development on them. I just wonder whether it's worth the effort to pursue this designation. I don't know exactly what's involved once you get into VDOT, but it seems to me I'd be uncomfortable like approving all these, not that we even have the opportunity to do so, but I'd be more inclined to focus on areas that we think are especially relevant, and we're going to probably identify those through this process that we're about to go through. If it's not a quarter where we're likely to have any activity or very little activity, then I'm not sure. Certainly the Scenic designation has other regulations perhaps attached to it, but just from an ARB review perspective, I'm not sure I would necessarily favor us expanding our reach unless it's, clearly justified.
So just to clarify, of the 4 streets that are listed that we're recommending that we pursue arterial status for, is there one of those that you are suggesting we shouldn't be?
I guess I have some anxiety over Avon Street. I don't think it's a major arterial, and it's a road that already has a fairly industrial character, and so I worry there aren't many places anymore in the county where you can actually build something that's akin to a warehouse or a purely functional structure, and Avon is kind of already serves that purpose. So I'm probably less comfortable with that as an ARB corridor. The 53 certainly has major value as a scenic corridor, but again, I'm not sure there's enough happening along it other than the stuff that's already there that's not likely to change. And then, profit to 20 North, so similar, I just don't think there's much there. So I don't know that it would make much difference one way or the other, but Avon would be probably of most concern to me.
And 20 North is in the list, not for arterial status, but for scenic.
Yes, for scenic, yeah, right. Yeah, that I'm.
I'll just add, I agree with you, Frank, but one thing I'm reminded of is the solar project on Route 53. And you're seeing more, it might not be traditional development on some of these that we're reviewing. And I know there was a lot of challenges with that review, but that might be something we want to consider is, and maybe that's handled with the scenic highway. There's protection, or there's some oversight there that could help us in that. But I agree, a lot of these, it's pretty rural, not a lot of development, but maybe down the road that changes.
You make a good point, Frank. I mean, that solar farm was certainly could have had a major visual impact on the highway. I don't know if the road has scenic highway status. I'm not sure I know exactly what that means in terms of sort of county-based regulation. Margaret, can you?
Well, again, we won't know exactly until we pursue it more and what might be allowed and what might be adopted. But the county did have scenic highway designation previously.
Right, yeah.
It was on Route 250 West, Route 20 South, and Route 6. And that scenic highway designation was taken away when the entrance corridor overlay was applied.
I see.
When the scenic highway designation was in place, I can tell you that it applied to 150 feet on both sides of the right-of-way. No buildings or structures except some signs were allowed within that 150 feet. No off-street parking or loading closer than 50 feet. You could reduce the building setback to 75 feet under certain circumstances. And then there were a bunch of regulations for signs within that 150-foot depth. So that's just an example of what it was before. It doesn't necessarily mean what it would be, or that we're even doing it. You know, we're still at the, should we be thinking about it? Should we be considering it?
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And I wonder, Frank, to your point about how we, are going to be looking at the corridors, we might be able to address the concern about, building types and use at Avon or other areas by recognizing, some different zoning characteristics along the corridors, but, still trying to enact some continuity to landscape and other elements of character. Margaret, I think this is tremendous, and I think, totally consistent. It's sort of the one box that some of these don't check is the arterial status, but certainly in terms of being significant roadways leading to significant historic sites and destinations, they're absolutely an important part of that part of the charge of the underlying empowering legislation. So really appreciate the work you and staff have put into this and support it fully. Why don't we move now to an action?
Does it require action?
Well, let me just, hold on just a second. I lost my cursor. Okay, here we go. Lost my cursor, sorry. Just a second. What I've got for action, yeah, it's really just to, if there's general support for what's recommended, I can just pass that along. If on the other hand, you want to provide specific comments on individual recommendations, for example, Frank Stoner's concern about Avon Street, we can do that.
Yeah, I would say if it doesn't require formal action on our part, maybe you could pass on comments and wait to see what direction the board wants to take.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. You'll have an opportunity to review my summary of the comments when you see the action memo in the next day or two, and I'll have an opportunity to attach that to the information that goes to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, Margaret.
You're welcome.
Well, before we move on to the next item, starting the review and study of the corridors and starting with 250, I realized I need to go grab my charging cable and plug my laptop in. I also just wanted to ask, I appreciate we've had a number of items today. Do folks still have until 3:30 or 3:45 this afternoon?
Yeah, I may have to check out a little bit early.
Okay, great. Well, if you'll excuse me for just a moment, I'm going to go get my cable and plug in. Do you want to reconvene? I think my phone says it's 2:53. Reconvene at 3 o'clock. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you very soon.
You want me to open or?
Thank you, Margaret. Actually, if I may, I have one I can share on screen, and then I can provide it to you separately if you need to have it available for correction.
Great, thank you.
Great. Yeah, as soon as Frank and Fred are back, and it looks like I have the rights to share the screen here. So okay, I'll pull it up as soon as folks are back. Great. Well, looks like the gang is all here. So thank you everybody for that break. My laptop is happy to, to have some power coming its way again. And thanks everybody for sticking with a good long session today. So I really appreciated Fred's remarks at the last meeting about how he'd been sort of contemplating the different zones and characters along the corridor he was studying and seeking really to try and identify that first. And so I think that was a lens that I used to look at 250 West for our meeting today, and appreciate it again, as our work often helps me appreciate anew just how beautiful and extraordinary so many parts of our county are. So I'll pull up a PowerPoint. I haven't yet begun to try and fill out the Excel file, and I suspect as we work through this, we may find some tweaks to that will help us make it more useful, but have really just tried to look today to try and start to break the corridor down into some recognizable chunks and pull out some salient features, and really look forward to everyone's input and discussion on that today. I think also appreciate, I think as Neil suggested, it's quite a vast undertaking, and you know, it may be that we ultimately narrow our focus this year to get further with it. So are folks able to see the full slide in this view? Yeah. And does the Zoom interface show up over the right side of the screen in what you're seeing? Okay, let me just see if I can. I like to leave the sorter open on the side just for navigation, but so here, of course, is 250 West from the county line at the west into the city of Charlottesville, I guess effectively at Emmett Street. It's about 22 miles of roadway, and I think for today, I might suggest we just go the first 20 up to the intersection with the bypass, which is really sort of a gateway to another zone. I found it helpful to take a look at the county's vast resources of maps, including the zoning map, and helped highlight for me that, you know, most of this corridor is in the designated rural zone. Sorry, I got that circle in the wrong place, but that, you know, there are a couple significant areas zoned commercial, really around the Bel Air market, around Northridge, a village residential designation around the center of Ivy, a little bit of commercial and significant residential designation through Crozet, with some more intense commercial use near the 64 intersection. And then I was surprised also to realize that there's a very significant subdivision already sort of platted and in place there out at the base of Afton. So as a quick breakdown, and these are obviously just early drafts, so we can work to adjust as we explore this together. But from the time I spent reviewing, it seemed like Afton Mountain to Greenwood, Crozet, and Ivy were all pretty clearly, potentially clear designations. And I can go into more potential definition of these. I think moving past that, I'm interested in others' thoughts about how best to define, if there is a single word that can, the area as we get closer into to Charlottesville, where there's so many properties that are sort of character defining. I think also, you know, really the Meacham's River zone is really almost more of a hyphen, it seems to me, in terms of landscape between Crozet and Ivy. And just to characterize, I was trying to figure out how best to summarize between sort of the Northridge commercial, the Bel Air Birdwood commercial and golf course landscape, the historic estate neighborhoods, and then the entry. I couldn't come up with one word to put it in, but so starting, I guess we'll go west to east today, and folks feel free to chime in or interject anywhere along the way. I think this is the first building in the county, the Lang's Art Shop, which I thought was pretty remarkable just for the way the stone wall, and then even though it's an asphalt shingle roof, the palette of that sort of grow out of and seem to blend into the landscape. Another example of sort of simple and vernacular buildings that I think representative of the corridor out in this area. The Afton Motor Lodge, which while it's fairly significant, it goes fairly far back into the site, it still manages to have a very diminutive appearance and impact on the corridor. I think starting here and throughout, I think one of the things that stands out is a lot of the development predates the corridor guidelines. And so in many cases, landscape requirements are not in place. And in many instances, parking and storage are not relegated and uses are not controlled. So there's a lot of, as you can see across the street at the team convenience store, while there's a very simple vernacular building, that belongs mostly it's parking and vehicles that dominate the presence there. The foot of the Rockfish Gap, the Rockfish Country Store, and again, while it has some blackness and the porch and the articulation, the red roof related to sort of the agricultural precedents, and ties it in quite well. And heading further east, again, simple sort of elemental form and weathered sort of industrial materials on the agricultural buildings, but again, marred a little bit by the unrelegated and unscreened parking. But then, really rapidly, you can see some of the real continuous elements of the landscape in this western part of the county. A lot of 3 and 4 board fence, especially 4 board fence, especially black on this corridor. And generally a landscape of woods or pastures with buildings really quite secondary and, either, hidden behind woods or far beyond pastures. And so, as a potential gap to the beginning of Greenwood, roughly at the intersection with Plank Road, really what is perhaps one of the most remarkable, I think, and intact landscapes, and one with really a remarkable character and continuity is Greenwood, where there, really landscape predominates. There's some great examples of entry and landscape here at Ridgely, with a painted stone wall and fences and an alley of trees that really mark that. But again, it's the landscape that announces the presence and not the buildings. Similarly here at Ramsey, buildings set very far back and really the landscape predominating. Couple exceptions in this zone. There's a small Seneco, and I think other, to our discussion earlier about blue and the gray and diminutive scale of the building is somewhat recessive, and if not for the canopy, I think it doesn't stand out. But another example in the historic Emmanuel Episcopal Church, again of a significant building, but one that really is sublimated almost within the landscape. And again, the importance of marks at the corridor of entry here at Mirador, at Seven Oaks. I think I was struck by, as much as there are significant buildings there, they're not really visible, and that the corridor really is characterized by landscape. This, I think, being the other the detraction, I think, along the corridor, sort of a very long blank screening wall, which isn't entirely effective at screening the parking and the vehicular use of the campsite. Again, the Cedars, a very remarkable and notable structural building, a landmarked one, but again, one just deeply situated in its landscape. And moving to the end of the Greenwood zone, the Village Market, with a really unique sort of collection of small vernacular buildings with very diminutive human scale, but a nice collection of sort of historic vernacular agrarian buildings. And then again at the Greenwood Gourmet Grocery, again, sort of simple gable forms relating to, barn roofs with porches for human occupancy. And while the parking's not relegated and the landscape is not in place, the building's sort of dark color palette and overall recessive materiality helps it blend a bit into the landscape. Struck a bit by how infrastructure forms gateways and passages along the corridor. So certainly 64 marks, I think, the passage into Crozet. And then for the time being, I've proposed sort of a west and an east Crozet. This western portion is somewhat more commercial and certainly marked at the beginning by the Yancey Mills complex, which we've looked at recently. And while certainly not conforming in many ways, it yields quickly to more recent development. I believe there are more trees now by the FNR building than in this shot from Google, but you can see evidence in this portion of Crozet of the impact of the guidelines as they're being put in place to a degree at Pro Renata and at the BP station. And then, earlier examples as well in the Citgo, Brown's Market, and others of buildings that still aren't meeting them. Although I thought that it was worth just noting this all engines possible, again, as a very diminutive, vernacular, and humble structure, but one that I think is characteristic of the historic buildings in the area. I was reminded of this cemetery approaching Western Albemarle, which I realize most of the time I miss because of sort of the number of vehicles and turning motions in front of Brown's Market. But and I have not included the Google Earth view of Old Trail because the entrance has been updated significantly since it was last shot, and I think is a good example of applying that sense from the western portion of the corridor of sort of gateway and entry marking and pillars, but yet in a more contemporary way. Then there's a zone really characterized by the Albemarle County Public Schools with Western Albemarle, Henley, and Brownsville. And there's a fair degree of continuity in landscape here. It's eroded in some places, and there's more of a monoculture, I guess, in terms of the tree planting by Henley and Brownsville, but still an opportunity within the county's full gift for shaping the character here, the corridor. And then crossing Miller School Road, a small existing commercial use. You can see sort of the porch and sort of relationship to vernacular agricultural forms. But then I think starts what is really maybe the defining characteristic of the corridor right now outside of development areas, which is sort of the VDOT maintained wooded corridor. It has been eroded a little bit in some areas. This is Sparrow Run several years ago when they were beginning clearing, but the finished neighborhood is indeed a big interruption to this landscape. And so one question for later I would have is, currently residential development doesn't really fall within our control. Are there any, not that we need to take it on, but are there additional landscape requirements on any of these corridors that we need to consider recommending to be sure that residential development doesn't erode their character? And certainly there are examples of residential development right next door at Quarry Farms, where there's much more significant planting along the entrance corridor, and where, in its maturity, the development is much more fully screened than at Sparrow Run. And you can certainly see in the blue, I think this is the Blue Ridge Shopping Center, the way the guidelines are, I think, in large part being effective at screening development and creating a continuity of character, again, over at Clover Lawn Village. And then an example of a building predating the guidelines at the building supply. But then quickly a return to sort of the wood-lined corridor, and at Fox Chase, another example of carrying on sort of the precedence of landscaped formal entrances from the corridor to development. Again, returning to the wooded corridor, and now entering sort of the Meacham's River zone of the transition from Crozet to Ivy. John W. Clayton & Son, and this building, while quite elemental, is one that actually, to me, is quite interesting as an example that still has a great deal of order and scale and hierarchy. Perhaps without the propane tank and a few things in the front yard would be still more appropriate. But I think an interesting example of a building that doesn't look like the historic precedents, but still has some notable characteristics. And then again, a notable piece of infrastructure and a gateway between the railway bridge over the river and the vehicular bridge over the river, entering sort of Greater Ivy. And I've broken it down into Western Ivy, west of what we'll call Ivy Village at the village development area. And again, notable pasture landscape at the river lowlands of Meacham's River. But still another example in the Barn Swallow of a recessive wood vernacular dark building screened really effectively by landscape and recessive within it. The bamboo, notwithstanding. And then heading up to the east again, just more views that show that consistency of character and entry here at Tillman Road. And then really, again, another example where still fairly effectively screened, but where residential development by right begins to erode a bit that character. Here at Turner Mountain Road, and then coming into Ivy Village, Ivy Commons, Duners. I think, obviously this area is beginning to see some development. We'll be seeing some more, I'm sure, but they're notable characteristics of the brick and, muted ivory tones that sit well on the landscape. Morgantown and Owensville, and then the passage under the railway bridge, which and hopefully as the village develops, it will develop well. This will, hopefully there's some plan for Buckingham to support pedestrian connection through there in the future. The Ivy Post Office and corner, again, very diminutive scale, vernacular wood-clad buildings, weathered painted finish, again at Toddsbury. And again, we'll be seeing some new evolution here. And then treating really the Little Ivy Creek as the edge of this zone. And then just driving on into town. Again, I think you can still see continuity of the wooded landscape, buildings basically not really apparent, even here at All Saints Anglican Church. More river landscapes. Here at Verdant Lawn Lane, this is opposite Brimley and Kearsarge. Folks might remember a few years ago, the new building and the farm and other things were quite visible. I think it's an example of a pretty remarkable thick landscape buffer that screens that development quite effectively. And George, I think the interesting coordination between the palette of the ground plane and the building reminds me of the building we started with at Lang's Art Shop. And some, outdoor coolers and parking, but even just a little bit of island planting and the corridor guidelines coming into place improve. The DS Tavern, of course, and again, just more continuity, I guess here with white 4-board fence. I thought this view is notable, sort of as a gateway coming up to Northridge, and this dark gray, almost black barn building is one that's always been remarkable to me. I think I think it's the Johnson Farm, just for the way it sort of sits, but recessively in the landscape. Coming up to Northridge and the Ivy Nursery, I think another remarkable example of a significant commercial use along the corridor, but one that's tremendously well screened from it. And then highlighting, Northridge really just because it is a development, or the zoning certainly supports additional development here. And I would say certainly that character is not yet fully defined. The university and medical center certainly defining sort of the larger scale brick buildings and good quality construction and carrying on the traditions of stone walls and landscape. Radiology with its mature landscape, a good example of a building we're seating in. The Bel Air service, a good example for white paint along the corridor, but one with perhaps a more weathered appearance, but another interesting example. And I think the Virginia Oil building, again, I'm struck by the simplicity of the form, the massing, and the material of the commercial buildings on this corridor and how they work. And then again, just moving through some of the neighborhoods at Ednam and Farmington, and the way they sort of embrace and continue the tradition of the gateways and also relate to the stone walls that define some of the historic estates here, Kinridge and White Gables and the boar's head. And we'll leave the portion of the landscape beyond the bypass to a future meeting, but these stone walls, the low stone walls, continue even beyond over at the Orthopedic Center and elsewhere, are an element of continuity in the landscape, I think, in this zone of the corridor. So, and then by the former Virginia Tractor, and of course the Bel Air Market, I think, as a gas station, carrying on the idea of porches and other local traditions, significant, and then the Bel Air Subdivision, again, screening residential development from the corridor. So a very quick drive down 250 West, and as I said, I think I'd like to defer the portion east of the bypass to a future discussion. But I have some initial questions proposed and could dive into those, but would also, folks would welcome observations and thoughts from others.
Nate, I think this is great. I'm a little concerned you set the bar too high. But no, I think this is really helpful. Did you want just like general comments?
Sure, yeah.
Just a couple thoughts. One is there may be some, these are random, so forgive me.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned a couple things at the beginning, like the words recessive materiality, right? And dark colors and things like that. I think that's the key, right? Is picking up some of those things and figuring out a way to kind of summarize them, which I think maybe that matrix will do. I think that, what you've set out here is a really great start to a template, in my opinion, and maybe it's something that we could use, basically plagiarize, so that it would be simpler and we could have one consistent template that we could all use. And then eventually kind of, maybe this is sort of the top of the funnel, and as things kind of trickle down to the tip of the funnel, it's a way, or we can sort of answer the question, how is this a tool that's useful for staff, the board, and applicants? What are the key takeaways on each of those? And then the last thing was just, and you made me think of this with, I think it's the Virginia Oil across from, our office across from Boar's Head.
Yes.
There may be things, I know you mentioned white paint and sort of that distressed look, but there may be some things along the corridor that we acknowledge are historic precedent that we don't want to. Those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you, Fred. Others?
I'll jump in, Dave, only because I'm gonna have to check out in a few minutes. But I was really struck by the different character of the corridor as you moved east, and it made me realize perhaps you're going to have a hard time establishing guidelines for the entire corridor that actually work. I was, in particular, I think, from Afton pretty much through Ivy until you get to the radiology center at UVA there, it's tends to be rural in character, and as you said, the architecture is diminutive and darker, more agriculturally rooted architecture. And so, I think to Fred's point, it would really be helpful to go through in each of those sections and identify the precedents that we think are good and the precedents we'd rather not have in the future. I was struck in Crozet in particular as you kind of go past Clover Lawn and the shopping center across the street, and which each have very different character, but were both, I think, approved by the ARB. although I don't know if maybe one of them predates. Anyway, they both have very different character. And to me, Clover Lawn feels much more appropriate than the shopping center does across the way. And yet the shopping center incorporates a lot of the materials that I think we would say, you know, would be appropriate from our county, the dark brick. And so, yeah, it'd be really, I think it'd be great just to take a little deeper dive into each of these areas and get feedback from all of us about what, you know, what things stick out and what we could retain as meaningful guidepost for folks, and what you kind of have to throw out and say, yeah, that's there, but it's not really contributing, it's detracting. Or, you know, how far west would you allow them to build a multi-story structure like UVA's built on the corridor? If you were in Ivy, would we allow that under any circumstances? Or yeah, I don't know. More questions. I don't have any answers. Just lots of questions. Yeah.
No, very good ones, Frank. And yeah, this exercise raised more for me than an answer as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris or Frank Hancock?
Yeah, that was a really excellent presentation, and I appreciate you doing all that. And I think, I don't know that this is unique to this corridor, but the kind of natural foliage seems to predominate, and what seems to stick out as you progress are the buildings that are just kind of nakedly in view with no foliage in front of them. I think of the example of the Blue Ridge Shopping Center and Blue Ridge Builder Supply, which is right next door. And one is much more successful in terms of integrating with the corridor, I think, because it's tucked behind trees, much like some of the more successful, like, historic buildings on the corridor, where Blue Ridge Builders is kind of right, you know, in your face. Even comparing it to like George's, like, where there is a building, but there is that little kind of green strip. You know, Ivy Nursery, once again, there's a nice screening of natural foliage that you kind of, you know, see the architecture through that screen. Seems to be kind of a, to my mind, a successful feature of that whole corridor. And the buildings that are just exposed seem to be the ones that, you know, stick out and are, you know, would be what we would want to prevent on that corridor if possible.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. No, that seems true to me too, that, you know, I felt like looking at this affirmed for me that, you know, the landscape requirements in our current guidelines are very worthwhile and are effective where they're implemented at creating more continuity, and also certainly taking more of the visual heat off of buildings and architecture, so that they don't have to carry the whole load. Frank Hancock, any initial?
Sure, thanks, Dave. Just real quickly, I think it's really nice how you broke the corridor down into kind of neighborhoods. And I think as an applicant, that would be super helpful to say, here, you're in West Ivy, here are the buildings, here are the landscape features, this is what's in your neighborhood. If you want to have the contextual discussion, you know, it doesn't necessarily relate to what's on Afton Mountain or at Afton Mountain, even though that's the same corridor. So it definitely drills down. I think we could do that endlessly, but I think this is a nice framework to just set you in the corridor and give you kind of some parameters. And then I'll just add one thing to note, especially in this corridor, is topography and landform. And I think to Frank Stoner's point of the different feel at the Harris Teeter and, you know, across the street in Crozet, has to do a lot with landform and who's on, you know, below the road and who's above the road or at level with the road. So just another lens. I think, like I said, I think we could do this endlessly with elements, but I really appreciate it. And I, concur with Fred that if we could plagiarize this, that would be great. I think this is beautifully done, and we wouldn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So,
well, I started by plagiarizing Google, so I think, yeah, this is definitely open source, and very delighted that the zones seem to resonate as a way to make it more digestible. That was one of the questions I had. I'll run through the other questions I had real quickly. Don't have to answer them all now, but I think from looking at this corridor, I felt like landscape is really the most defining element. The primary one, I don't know if folks would concur. Really, and I was interested, and we can revisit it, but are additional measures needed to reinforce consistency of the corridor landscape in residential and rural areas? I think there are some forms of development that we don't review, and while to date the development pressure on the corridor hasn't been such that it's eroded those borders, are there any other recommendations we would like to make or consider making to help preserve more of a buffer? And the other thing, I was also, just as a question, I was being struck by how consistent and, at least to me, remarkable the Greenwood landscape was. Many of the properties there are already historic landmarks, or at least on the register. Would it makes, I don't think it's our place, it's some other body's place, but recommending some historic designation for that landscape to preserve it. And then I think from the discussion, I think one of the other questions was, as you said, Chris, the buildings that stand out like Greenwood, Market, and others stand out in large part because of the interruption in the landscape. And to some extent, some of those are reasonably successful, but I think it's only in the context of the great continuity that exists today. So I think, like you and your observation with Harris Teeter, it seems to me, after looking at this, that continuing to enforce the EC guidelines is a good way to both preserve and improve the character of the corridor. And then I think just, so I've begun trying to summarize some of the material and formal characteristics. And Fred, to your point, yeah, the funnel's quite broad, so I appreciate the need. We'll get some finer sieves out, and I hope to eventually translate this to others. But as a potential follow-up, if members would like to advise, separately which buildings they want to sort of nominate as ones to celebrate and which ones to pan. To help folks in interpreting the context of the guidelines, I'd welcome that and be happy to try and synthesize it into the form. Let's see. Well, I know it's coming up on 3:30. Are there other thoughts or observations?
I guess just one other thought as we think about landscape and in particular how the EC corridor guidelines are enforced. I wonder whether in some of these rural areas a different standard is needed. To your point, when the EC guidelines tend to be pretty suburban feeling, I guess if that's the right word for it. Yeah. And when you impose those as they were in Crozet at the shopping center there, in some ways, to me, it feels a little bit out of place. Mm-hmm. Like you kind of dump the suburban model into what was otherwise a rural kind of landscape. Mm-hmm. So I don't, having said that, I'm not sure I could tell you what the solution is.
Well, no, but I think that's a great observation, Frank, because, I do think there's a risk in having the same guidelines applied everywhere, that you create you map some uniformity over the more diverse and different contexts that do exist.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Frank. The thing that comes to mind is we were talking about Greenwood and how beautiful that corridor is. we're not going to see an applicant come in who says they want to build another giant estate with a lovely entrance road and a stone wall. We're going to see the applicant that comes in and says, this would be a great place for sheets, right? Exaggeration, but how does something like that, not that it would be a sheets, but something like that, that would go in that area fit in? Frank, I think is a great thing to think about. When you get to those areas that are crozet where they're more built up, maybe it's more appropriate, or maybe there's a transition zone or something. But yeah, I think it's a great thing to be considering.
Well, it's going to come to us because I think a Wawa wants to locate at the corner of 240 and 250.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it'd be, and I'm sure that's going to feel it's going to want to feel very much like the one they did on 29, and I'm not sure in this context that's appropriate at all.
That's a great point.
Mhm.
One example I think about a lot is the Northridge stone wall and landscape, because that's it seems somewhat out of place, the tall, big commercial building. But I feel like that landscape element really helps tie it in to the corridor. And I know that's like kind of above and beyond maybe what we would get from a lot of applicants, but as maybe an example to point to of like, hey, there's a way to transition this, or to relate it to the landscape, or to relate it to your corridor. I think about that example a lot. I think it's really successful.
Yeah, and it both mitigates, I think, that scale of the large medical complex, and then also helps to screen and buffer that very sort of basic rescue service building behind it.
In a parking lot.
Yeah, and a parking lot. Yeah. No, that's a great point. What landscape types and forms, and also what building character makes sense on this corridor. Sounds like there might be consensus that buildings that relate more to agrarian form and typology may be more appropriate in this more other rural zones. Great. I apologize. I don't have the calendar of our planned next study in front of us. I did punt on the corridor, the Ivy Road corridor to Emmett, which is a whole nother zone and character, I think, than everything leading to it. Could try to revisit that at the next one and push the schedule out. Or I think Frank Stoner, you may have been on deck next for some of the roads and.
Next on the list was Route 240, which
240. So that would certainly.
Okay, yeah, I've taken that one on.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess Chris and I corresponded after the last meeting. So we probably need to update you with who's doing what.
Okay. Great. Well, I think, Chris, if you're willing to follow on 240 in 2 weeks, it'd be great to keep this sort of look at the western zone going. And I'll continue in the background trying to filter this a bit, and also start to look a little bit further east, east on Ivy.
Dave, is it possible to put these in a Dropbox or something where?
Yes, yeah, I will. And I can, these are just all screenshots snipped into a PowerPoint. The file is about 300 megs, so it takes a while to make it through the straw, but I'd be very happy to share it with folks.
And maybe even just some representative slides so we can keep the format consistent, but not have the full, 3 million megabytes.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah.
It'll take me 8 weeks to download.
Yes. Yeah.
Then do we want to come back to this and take a deeper dive into this, or how do we envision look like at the end, or do we want to stay on this till we finish it, or?
Well, that's a good question, Frank, and I guess I'm reminded of Neil's question and open for discussion. You know, we've adopted a calendar that has us looking all around the county over the next year, which would basically mean probably we could do this level of filling the funnel for the whole county, or alternatively, we could revisit it. Maybe we could say we're going to stay focused to the west for this year, or at least for the first half of the year. Try and complete looking at all of the corridors over there and distill them into recommendations, and then move on to another quadrant or sector. I don't know, any initial thoughts that folks have?
Yeah, I like that idea, maybe sticking with the stuff to the west, but coming back and focusing while because you have these thoughts and then you lose them. And then, you know, if you have to come back 6 months from now and look through it again, I feel like I have to reacclimate or educate myself.
Yeah, no, I would too. I think, Frank, so if others support it, I would be in support of maybe reshaping our focus for at least the next 6 months to try and complete a deeper dive on this. I see some nods.
That makes sense.
I like that. And maybe we think about what's the deliverable of, hey, is it a one-sheeter per corridor that, you know, something we can distill down and become that addendum to the guidelines, or so we can be working towards, you know, how do we pull from this presentation to get it to, you know, distilled to be used.
Yeah, I think if for this and other corridors, the breakdown of zones works, I can imagine even possibly one pagers for each of them. It did occur to me that there are probably at least two types of zones on this corridor. One that you could broadly call development, which whether that be Crozet or Northridge or Bel Air Birdwood commercial zoning areas, and then the rest being primarily rural area / residential, and trying to, you know, craft guidelines for that, or not guidelines. I know we're trying to craft an addendum or a supplement to the guidelines, but
Yeah, I think having conversations, you know, about not today necessarily, but how these will all be used is a good snapshot for us. You know, I could envision an applicant coming to staff saying, I want to build a Wawa at the intersection of 240 and 250 or whatever. And then have staff say, oh, well, great, thank you for that. Here's a series of photographs. So here's a series of precedent images that we've studied, and we recommend that you take elements from each of these, and then they come back to us and say, hey, we've already reviewed these. Here are the elements we've taken. It might save the applicant time and save staff time.
yes, yeah. And then as a promulgated either guideline or just supplement, we could maybe encourage applicants as part of their applications to demonstrate their relationship to the context.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for the extra time today, and to everybody for their efforts on the corridor. It's exciting to consider them together, and like you all, look forward to figuring out how we can translate this to a meaningful deliverable and tool to help applicants and staff in the county.
Dave, do you want specific comments about the architectural precedents that we don't think should be included?
I would appreciate, yes, yeah, anything you definitely do or don't want included would be helpful. And I think we may even, I can imagine it could be worthwhile for applicants to have reasons why we don't like some things, or why some things don't comply, rather are not appropriate, to help. But yes, certainly would welcome that additional feedback. Let's see if.
Sounds great.
Great. Well, thank you again. Let's see, I think we have just a couple items to wrap up for everybody today. So we still have approval of the minutes from December 21st. Let's see, do we have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Missile.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. So our next meeting is January 19th. That's a Tuesday due to the Monday holiday. Will everybody be present?
Yes.
Great.
Other than that,
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you all.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good week.
You too.